you'll understand a little bit why these things are different. What it all comes down to is deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. Now, it's something that most people have probably heard of, and certainly something that everyone has seen. It looks kind of like a coiled up spring, maybe like a shock that you have on your car. But if you were to untwist that molecule and look at it, you'd notice that it's kind of like a ladder. It has two parallel rails and a series of rungs in between, connecting the two rails. Now, these rungs are really what's very important. The rungs on this ladder are made of one of four chemicals: adenine, cytosine, guanine, or thymine. It's not really important. You can call them A, C, G, and T. Now, the order of these rungs on the ladder is what's really, really important. And I'll get to that in a little bit later. But if you were to look at a cell with a benchtop microscope, you would see DNA as just kind of a dark spot, and it doesn't really look like very much. But in actual fact, it's very orderly and very organized. In our cells, every cell in our body, our DNA is split into 23 packages called chromosomes. Now, each chromosome is a single length of DNA. And the length it's almost 500 million rungs per strand of DNA. So 23 times 500 million, you're talking 11.5 billion rungs. And that's in every cell in your body, so that's pretty amazing. Now, what's really neat about these chromosomes is that's where our genes are located. Now, some people have a misconception about how genes work and what they look like and all that sort of stuff. But in actual fact, there is not necessarily a gene for brown eyes or a gene for blue eyes. You should probably think of a gene more like a recipe. How about a recipe for pancakes? So everybody has a recipe for pancakes, but some people have different versions of that recipe. So some people will use blueberries, and some people will use chocolate chips. Now, the result of that recipe, no matter what, is all pretty much the same. You're talking about a very thin cake that you fry on a pan. And that's the same way alleles work with genes. An allele is just a simple change in a few A, C, G's, and T's along that small area of the chromosome that makes a slight difference. So it would probably be more appropriate to say Nami has the allele for brown eyes instead of the gene for brown eyes. Now, as I mentioned, the A, C, G's, and T's make slight differences. But what is the purpose of the A, C, G, and T? Well, like I said, it's a recipe. What is the product of this recipe? Not much more than protein. And everyone's fairly similar or familiar with protein. It's made of amino acids and all that stuff. I'm sure our good friend down here, Lee, is very familiar with amino acids, smoking iron and all that stuff. Every 3 sets of rungs on this DNA ladder asks for a specific amino acid to be made on this protein chain. And when you look in the mirror and you see your hair and you see your skin, your fingernails, your muscles, that's all made of protein. But these recipes also create a very special type of protein called enzymes. And these are the chemicals and power tools that your body uses to break down the food that you eat and turn it into useful energy so that you can live. Now, sometimes, though, if people are exposed to too much UV damage or chemicals or radiation or something like that, it can actually change the organization of the A, C's, G's, and T's on your DNA, and that causes mutations. So sometimes diseases from these mutations can happen. The DNA, the recipe from the genes creates a DNA or creates a protein that doesn't work properly, and sometimes diabetes or sickle cell anemia can result from things like that. But not all mutations are actually bad. If you indulge me with my silly little story here for a second, you'll realize that. Consider a tiny island, a tropical island covered with a nice warm ocean. Now, on that island lives a group of pig-like animals. So one day, a piglet female is born, and she has legs that are slightly longer than all the other pigs on the island. So now this pretty tall female pig can walk out into the water a bit, and she has access to all sorts of seaweed and shellfish. And growing up with such a healthy diet compared to other pigs, she'll be very, very attractive. She'll be the sexiest pig lady on that beach. Just ask those pig men, they'll tell you the same thing. So, being such an attractive pig lady, she'll probably have lots and lots of offspring to pass on her sexy pig leg genes onto the next generation. So, in a couple of hundred generations, you'll have two groups of pigs, two different species. A short-legged pig that's stuck on the land, and a long-legged pig that can go out in the water. Now consider what could happen if those long-legged pigs all of a sudden were born one day and had webbed toes. Not much of a change, but all of a sudden they can swim perhaps. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Easy peasy really. Genetics is not much more than just a way to cook up me and you. DNA is like a giant recipe book full of 20,000 recipes that you need to make the proteins to make meat. But sometimes there can be problems with your DNA. Sometimes chemicals and whatnot can rearrange the letters of your DNA, and proteins that don't quite work result. You can have diseases. But other times, sometimes mutations can actually create good things, so that you have legs that may be longer than others in your species. That's actually good because, well, that's really what caused us to rise up from our embryonic soup a couple billion years ago, and you have all sorts of great plants and animals around us today, some more tasty than others. Thank you.